Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. Without question, Chris Christie has been the most forceful and direct among Republican presidential candidates when it comes to taking on former President Donald Trump. That clarity has earned him support. It has also turned some voters against him. That's a dynamic he's going to be contending with as we hit the final months of this primary. Governor Christie is our guest this morning on Close Up. Thanks for being here, Governor.
Great to be here, Adam.
So let's deal with some breaking news on Friday as we start out here. The former Deputy State Director for President Trump here in New Hampshire, Dylan Quattrucci, has reportedly resigned. News 9 was first to report a couple of months ago that he was present at January 6th outside the Capitol, tweeting things like, "I'm willing to bleed for my country," even it's just cut on his pinky, I guess, things like that. But subsequent videos that came out were more serious, things like him saying he thinks that Capitol Police should kill themselves. We know many subsequently did. Took 2 months for this guy to resign.
Look, this is kind of what Trump world is all about. I think Donald Trump probably was going to try to hire this guy back, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did. He also said Mike Pence is a traitor in one of his posts, because Mike Pence actually followed the Constitution and helped the certification of the election as he's required to do under the Constitution. So look, this is the problem. And by the way, folks like Dylan Quattrucci would be the kind of people who would be staffing the Trump White House in a second term. And if that doesn't give voters in New Hampshire pause for voting for Donald Trump, it should. And so my guess is, I'm willing to bet you between now and the primary, Dylan Quattrucci is back in some form or fashion.
You know, in another one of those videos that surfaced, Quattrucci is seemingly trying to whip up the mob on January 6th, shouting expletives, quote, "I work for the Republican Party. I'm done. I'm going to attack." If the FBI is seeing this, is this the kind of person you want to sit down and talk to interview, and kind of just get a sense of like, hey, why are you inciting this?
Well, I'm sure they probably will, especially now after his resignation. I know they're serious about, as they should be, about those people who are involved in January 6th. The tricky thing, Adam, of course, is determining between those people who are involved in peaceful protest and those people who are actually involved in inciting. You know, they're going to get all the information and make that decision about whether to recommend charging to the Justice Department or not. But in the end, it tells you the kind of people that Donald Trump attracts to go up to Capitol Hill that day. Remember, he gave his speech that day and said he was going to march up there with them. Well, we all know that if Donald Trump's in danger of breaking a fingernail, he's not going to do it, and he didn't do it that day, despite the fact that he told folks he would. But he certainly, that motivated a lot of people to go up there and act in the way they acted.
On the legal front, in a broader sense, since the splash of the indictments, we've seen some steps forward, more lawyering going on in these cases. From your perspective, as we get some billable hours in here for you,
Sure, yeah.
Which one of these cases do you see now as the greatest threat to Trump?
The greatest threat to Trump long-term is the classified documents case, because there, two things are very clear. They have dozens of witnesses who are going to talk about Trump talking about classified information to them on the patio at Mar-a-Lago or on the patio at Bedminster in New Jersey, that he had that information, he was showing it to people. So he's got problems with that, and he's also got problems with obstruction of justice, because he lied to his own lawyers about what documents he had, where he kept them, and then had them lie to the government based on his representations. I mean, it's a pretty open and shut obstruction case. I think that's the worst one for him, followed closely behind by the January 6th case. And I think the January 6th case becomes problematic because of him setting up the alternate electors, fake electors. And that's not about ensuring election integrity, as he's spoken about. That's about trying to overturn the election. So I think those are the two most serious ones. I think the New York case is a joke. It should have never been brought. And the Atlanta case, I think, shouldn't have been brought against him. I don't mind it getting brought against the other people, but against him, he had already been indicted for January 6th federally, and I think it's an overreach for the DA in Fulton County to have indicted him in Atlanta after he had already been indicted federally. So I think the two federal cases are the ones that certainly keep him up at night.
Are we getting a taste of what's to come here, that we see Trump more in the courtroom now than on the campaign trail?
Well, that's absolutely right, Adam. I mean, look, we're having an explosion on Capitol Hill politically with Kevin McCarthy. And where is the guy who was the nominee of the party for the last 2 cycles and the front runner in this election? He's in a courtroom defending his money. Money, by the way, that he won't use to pay his own legal fees. He only pays the money that people out there donate to him. to pay his legal fees. But nonetheless, he's in there protecting his money, not campaigning against Joe Biden, not making the case against all these congressional Democrats who voted to kick Kevin McCarthy out as Speaker, not making the case against those 8 Republicans who decided to side with Democrats to get rid of a Speaker. No, he's in a courtroom. And by the way, that's the way it's going to be for the next 2 years. He's going to be inside courtrooms. And by the way, on this case, in the civil case, it's optional for him to be there. In all the criminal cases, he must be there because that's a condition of bail. Imagine saying a condition of bail about somebody who's running for president of the United States. That's why he can't be the nominee. If he is, and Republicans in New Hampshire have to know this, if Trump is the nominee, if he wins New Hampshire and he becomes our nominee, we are going to lose to Joe Biden. We're going to lose the House of Representatives, and we won't recognize this country after Joe Biden has 2 more years as president with a Democratic Congress.
Trump's decision not to attend the debates. One can make the argument this is a disservice to the American people. Then you watch some of the debates, and sometimes maybe it's the whole thing's a disservice to the American people if nobody gets to get a word in edgeways. But it has seemingly been a disadvantage for you because you really wanted to go off the top rope and take it to him there. How do you get around this, not being able to get that big moment that you wanted, kind of mano a mano with him on stage?
Well, look, that's why he's not coming, because he's a coward. If his, he says he was the greatest president, except for Abraham Lincoln in our history. Amazing. But if he is, then why wouldn't you come to the debate and defend your record? He's not coming. Look, I continue to make the case against him. You're right. I haven't yet had that moment with he and I together. But, keep your eyes open. That may come sooner than he thinks.
You've seen the net favorability numbers, obviously, because, as you say, tell it like it is. There are some people who love it. There are some people who don't like that at all. How do you get around that in New Hampshire? The Republicans who aren't going to support you because they don't like it when you criticize Trump. Well, the same Republicans are going to be the Republicans who are voting for Trump and not for me anyway. If you look at those numbers, they fairly closely correlate to the Trump voter numbers. So I understand if I'm criticizing Donald Trump and you're a Trump voter, you're not going to think favorably of me. But in New Hampshire, for instance, over 60% of those people are open to voting for somebody other than Donald Trump. And those are the voters that we're going to go and win. And as you know, given what you were just saying in the open about the Democratic primary, I think the overwhelming amount of independents are going to be voting in the Republican primary in New Hampshire this time. And I don't think that's good news for Donald Trump. Your super PAC is trying to get Democrats to vote for you. Do you think that could be a risk down the road if Republicans see a super PAC supporting you? I know it's not you, but your face is on the mailer, and they say, gosh, here's somebody who's trying to pull people who aren't in our party in to support him. Yeah, I think it's, I didn't approve the idea because we can't do that stuff, but I think it's a great idea. Look, Donald Trump is the only person in the last 100 and some years to have lost the popular vote twice in a row. We as Republicans need to win the popular vote again. I want to expand our party, make it bigger, broader, stronger against Joe Biden. So not only can we win the Electoral College vote, but we can win the popular vote, and so that no one will doubt who the next president is going to be. I'm the only guy on the stage, Adam, who has beaten a Democratic incumbent. I beat John Corzine in 2009, and to think about that, only 3 Democratic governors have lost in the last 30 years. And I've beaten one of those 3. And so, we need someone who can actually win in November. And I'm sure that what the Super PAC is doing is getting ready for a general election race where we have Democrats feeling comfortable in voting for a Republican because they're so tired of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We see DeSantis making a bit of a pivot now, being a bit more forceful in his attacks. Are you buying it? No. This is a guy who, ran TV commercials in 2018 with his children in MAGA pajamas and reading the MAGA bedtime stories. No, I don't buy it. But look, it shows you that all this stuff that you're asking me about, is my approach not working? Well, then why are other people starting to attack Donald Trump now? I think they're finally coming to the realization that the only way to beat someone is to beat them. And I have nothing personal against Donald Trump, except I think that he doesn't belong being president of the United States. And I want to be president because I would take an entirely different approach and different tone to the way you handle the presidency. So no, I think that folks like him and Nikki Haley is ramping it up a little bit as well. But, she's the one who said that she wouldn't even run against him if he got into the race. He was such a great president. But now starts to criticize him a little bit. I think people have to wonder about what they really think, or whether they're seeing that my
tack on this is the right one to take, and they want to take advantage of it now that I've cleared the underbrush a bit.
We've done a lot of politics here. I do want to get into a little foreign policy. You know, we talk all about this back and forth about Trump, Biden, all of these things. You know, whoever's in the White House in 2026, 27 might have to deal with a Chinese attack on Taiwan. If you're the president, how are you responding in that moment?
Well, first of all, I'm hoping to make sure that by 2025 and 2026, I set a foreign policy that will convince the Chinese that the juice is not worth the squeeze, that it's not worth it for them to go after Taiwan. We would beat them in Taiwan, and I'm convinced of that. But I don't want to have that fight, and I don't want to send American men and women halfway across the world to fight in Taiwan unless we absolutely have to. That's why Ukraine is so important, Adam, because the Chinese are funding the Ukrainian war for the Russians. If we give the Ukrainians the weapons they need to win that war, we're sending a message to Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran that don't mess with the United States and their allies, and don't go against freedom-loving countries. So the way to avoid a conflict in Taiwan is to win the conflict with Ukraine, and to win it without American troops, but with Ukrainian troops.
All right, Governor Christie, thanks for joining us here on Close Up. We'll see you out there in the campaign trail.
You bet, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate the time.